Gaudete, gaudete, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine gaudete.
Welcome to the Rediscovery channel. This is the channel where I, Ipuwer Papyrus, and my good friends Stilgar and Great Pharaoh take turns coming up with topics from history that the other person hasn't heard about and often doesn't know about. Today it is my turn, and what I'm doing is actually a sequel to the last video the last topic that I did, which was about the historicity of Moses. And if anyone's tuning in for the first time, I recommend going back and watching the previous video regarding the historicity of Moses, where we build a case for when Moses was born and roughly when the Israelites were enslaved and when they left Egypt. So we came up with a few criterions from Josephus and from the Bible where the Israelites were enslaved. It had to be during the 12th dynasty, which is the Middle Kingdom period, because according to Josephus, they helped to build irrigation and pyramids for the Egyptians. And then based on what the Bible says, they used bricks made with straw. So the New Kingdom period is eliminated because there's no pyramid construction at all during that time. The Old Kingdom period is eliminated because the pyramids that they built were with stone and were built using some kind of technology that's been lost. We don't know. We're not going to speculate about that here. But as for the names and faces of the Pharaoh and Moses and the lady who took him out of the water when he was a baby, we're looking for a Pharaoh who had no sons and who had at least one daughter who had no children at all. And this Pharaoh needs to rule for over 40 years because Moses left Egypt when he was 40. So we're looking for someone with an unusually long reign, and according to Josephus, Moses was going to be the heir to the throne. So we're looking for an irregular person that was either on the throne or was in preparation to be on the throne. So based on all these criteria, and also using the Ipuwer Papyrus as a stop for how late this all can be, which the Ipuwer Papyrus was written during the 13th dynasty, I'm going to go ahead and share who I believe are the identities of these individuals, and then we're going to talk about what Moses did while he was in Egypt, before he killed the Egyptian guard. So we're looking near the end of the 12th dynasty, and it just so happens that I found some people that perfectly fit the criterion that we need. So the Pharaoh who adopted Moses as his foster son, I'm going to cite Amenemhat III. So Amenemhat III was the second to last pharaoh of the 12th dynasty. And he ruled for at least 45 years, maybe as long as 49, because there's some king's list where it says 40 plus an unknown number because the other part of the number is rubbed out. So he could have been there for as long as 49 years. He had two daughters. Their names were Neferupta and Sobek-Neferu. Neferupta died at a relatively young age without having any children. She died prematurely, so for a while, like her burial pyramid wasn't even ready when she died. And then Sobek-Neferu, she became the first female pharaoh, and she took over after Amenemhat III was dead. And she only ruled for about 3 years, and then she died. So she was kind of a older woman to begin with, probably in her 60s. Now then there's another guy called Amenemhat IV, who is not biologically related to these people, and he was set up as co-regent with Amenemhat III for about 8 or 9 years, maybe 10 years tops. So let's just go ahead. So I'm proposing that Amenemhat IV is Moses. Amenemhat III is the pharaoh that threw all the babies into the river, all the baby boys, and then raised Moses in the palace. And we'll talk about why he did that, and also why Sobek-Neferu took him out of the water. So let me build my case here a little bit. Like we talked about in Josephus, no male heirs, right? So Amenemhat III, he had no sons at all. You know, some guys, no matter how many times they try, it's always girls that come out. Henry VIII had a similar problem. So Amenemhat IV was appointed as the heir and served as a co-regent. He is listed on multiple kings' lists, and he's followed by Sobek-Neferu. Now, Sobek-Neferu, her name means beauty of Sobek. And you guys know who Sobek is, right? Or no? For anybody who doesn't know, Sobek was the god who supposedly created the Nile River. He's an alligator, but he created the Nile River with his sweat. And it was believed that he's the one that brought the fertility to the land. Now, reading about him, I'm not sure like if it's just the fertility of the soil or also the fertility of you being able to have kids. It could be both, not sure. But for sure, it's like associated with the black silt that was brought in. So he's associated with power, fertility, military prowess. He was the patron god of the army. And he was also the protector of the pharaoh. Supposedly, he protected the pharaoh from dark magic and protected the people from the dangers of the Nile. Amenemhat III, he was a big fan of Sobek. He heavily sponsored Sobek and the priesthood of Sobek and built temples and statues for the worship of Sobek. A lot of these projects were done in the Fayum, which is still have you been to the Fayum, a great pharaoh?
Yes, I have been to the Fayum. It is in Upper Egypt. In other words, when we say Upper Egypt, that is the south region of Egypt, and that's where the southern people. It's sort of like country folks, as opposed to the city folks in the northern region.
Yeah. So Amenemhat III, he spent a lot of money and effort developing this region and actually turning it into a better place for farming. So he initiated all kinds of building projects there, and it was also the cult center for Sobek. So there's a temple of Sobek that he built there, 2 pyramids for himself, 2 burial pyramids. The first is at Dashur, and the second one is at Hawara. I think the Hawara is in...
Lots of Christians in Fayum as well.
Yeah.
Lots of Christians, lots of Coptic Christians, lots of churches, lots of... there are Muslims, though, too. They do live amongst Muslims, but it's primarily Christian, from my understanding.
Awesome. Yeah, the excavation. So he excavated and expanded, cleared the sludge out of Lake Moeris, Moeris, and expanded it. And he drained some of the swamps that were there, and he built irrigation structures to regulate the flow of water into Lake Moeris. And he reclaimed, by draining the marshes throughout this process, he reclaimed 153,600 acres of land, and that created more farmland. So this right here might be the beginning of turning that place into a productive farming region. And then to commemorate his success, he had 2 huge statues of himself erected there, and then a mortuary complex built near his pyramid in Hawara, which the Greeks, they came to refer to as the labyrinth. Herodotus also visited this place, and he was impressed by it. But the labyrinth, it also served as a center for administration and religious activity. Sobek-Neferu, you know, the Bible tells us that she was down by the water when she saw Moses. She was bathing there. Josephus says like she was sporting there, if I recall correctly. But it's possible that she was also there to pray to Sobek, and maybe also happy, because she had no children of her own ever. And, you know, she's named after the god Sobek. So and her father was a big patron of Sobek. So it's possible that she was trying to appeal to him, like, please open up my womb. And when this basket came floating down the river with a baby in it, she probably assumed that, hey, this is from Sobek. I better, do something here. Now, in case anybody is going to ask in the comment section, like, if she adopted Moses, then why isn't it mentioned anywhere that Sobek Neferu had a child? Because it's not mentioned anywhere that she had any child, adopted or otherwise. So, Stilgar, I want you to read Hebrews 11:24 through 27.
All right. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible.
So he refused to be called the son of the Pharaoh's daughter. So that there we have a reason, even though she adopted him, he was still kind of didn't want to be listed anywhere or on anything as being her son, which maybe she took as an insult. But we don't have any son listed to her, adopted or otherwise. So that's probably why right there that he refused it. And of course, he may have also had a secular reason for refusing to be called her son, because Amenemhat III needed somebody to sit on the throne after him. And it would have been kind of weird to have like a grandson or an adopted grandson be the next heir. So, of course, he's never listed as the king's son anywhere. But, I mean, he was kind of basically, when it comes to him sitting on becoming the co-regent, his successor is listed as Amenemhat III, not Sobek Neferu. And interestingly, Sobek Neferu she lists herself as being the successor to Amenemhat III. She doesn't list Amenemhat IV, but I'll talk more about that in a bit and why it's significant. So most of my information about Amenemhat IV comes from this book that I have, which was kind of expensive. I had to order it online from an English publisher in the UK. So this book is called Amenemhat IV and the End of the 12th Dynasty, Between the End and the Beginning, by Stefania Pignatari. And it comes from a group called Bar Publishing. So I'll put a picture of that there. It's a pretty good book because she actually has either all or at least most of the stelas and monuments pertaining to Amenemhat IV. Like, she has pictures of them all in the back, and then translations and explanations, and she gives different theories and speculation, but it was a pretty useful source for me. So Amenemhat IV, he ruled for about 9 years, and he's listed on multiple kings lists, but it's known that he started his reign as a co-regent with Amenemhat III. And there's some debate over whether or not he ever became a sole regent, like a single regent ruling by himself. I think that most of the secular people there, including Stefania Pignatari, they believe that he ruled by himself for about 6 years, and Amenemhat III died during his reign. But there's other people that assert that no, he never ruled by himself. He only existed as a co-regent. And of course, my position is that he only existed as a co-regent, and I believe it's sound. I'm going to go over why, because there's a few reasons. So why do I say that he was never the sole pharaoh? Like, obviously, if he became the sole pharaoh, then this couldn't be Moses, right? Of course, the evidence is good that he never ruled by himself. He was just a co-regent. And again, the co-regency was something that was implemented by the founder of the 12th dynasty, Amenemhat I. because he wanted the next pharaoh to be ready to go, and when the first pharaoh dies. So Amenemhat I, he came out of a situation where the previous pharaoh had no heir, and he was the vizier. He took over after the previous pharaoh died, but it was a bit rocky. It was a bit difficult, and then he had to do all kinds of propaganda to justify himself being there. So to make things more streamlined, they implement the process of the co-regency, and that way the next pharaoh is good to go. He's already legitimized as pharaoh before the first pharaoh dies. So, so let's talk about it. So there's my first reason is there's no record of Amenemhat IV ever having a vizier. So during the 12th dynasty, the Egyptian government could be pretty much divided into two bureaus. Okay, there's the Bureau of the Vizier, and then the Bureau of the Treasury. And the term for the Treasury that they actually used is White House, like if you translate it literally. So there's the Vizier and the Treasury, and each one has like a chief executive who's underneath the pharaoh directly. Now, Amenemhat IV, he had no vizier, but the responsibilities of the vizier include organizing the workforce and royal building projects, as well as administration. And the treasury was responsible for finance, acquisition, management, and the storage of raw materials, as well as food production and storing the food. So this was kind of how the government is split up. And there's no vizier listed for Amenemhat IV. And I think there's actually no officials in that bureau that are connected to him. However, he did have a chief treasurer, and that guy's name was Jaf Horemsef. And we'll talk about him too a little bit further down. So there's no vizier, okay? And then the next thing is the funerary complex of Amenemhat III is completed by Sobek-Neferu, not by Amenemhat IV. And her name is all over the inside of the funerary complex, but his is not mentioned at all, which is what we'd expect if he was thrown out of office or he had to leave on bad terms while Amenemhat III was still there. And this, it would also be, we would also expect Sobek-Neferu not to list herself as, not to list Amenemhat IV as her predecessor, which she doesn't. She lists Amenemhat III. So it's kind of a weird situation where this guy was getting ready to be the pharaoh. Some people say he was. He was a co-regent at any rate. He still had the title of pharaoh. But Sobek-Neferu doesn't attribute, normally the new pharaoh lists the previous pharaoh and that they follow after this person, but she connects herself to Amenemhat III, not Amenemhat IV. So yeah, because of this, at the funerary complex, where no credit is given to Amenemhat IV, and she just says, that she's following after the third, a lot of people have concluded, including secular scholars, that Amenemhat IV was only a co-regent, and either he died in office or he left on bad terms, and so he isn't acknowledged after he's gone. Another thing is there's a relief carving of Amenemhat III and Amenemhat IV standing next to each other, which you guys can still see, and I'll put it in the slideshow. This is at the funerary complex of Hawara, and it's the same complex which Sobek-Neferu finished. So in this relief carving, you have Amenemhat III standing on one side and the fourth standing next to him. And Amenemhat III is extending an ankh. He's holding ankh in his hand towards the fourth, kind of crossed over himself. And it's to show that he's passing the throne to this guy, like it's his will that this guy comes next. And this is the same complex that Sobek-Neferu actually finished. But, on the outside with this monument, Amenemhat III is clearly indicating that he wants this guy to come next. But Sobek-Neferu, who finishes the complex, indicates that she's actually the one who comes next. And again, like Amenemhat IV, she didn't tear down his monument on the outside, but she didn't list him at all on the inside. So, and then the final bit of evidence I want to talk about is that there's no depictions of Amenemhat IV wearing the complete dual crown. You know, there's the red crown for Lower Egypt and the white crown that's kind of cone-shaped for Upper Egypt. And there's quite a few drawings, I guess you could say, of Amenemhat IV and some like other two-dimensional depictions, but he's never depicted as wearing the full crown. There's one where he's just wearing the lower crown, you know, the crown of Lower Egypt, the Delta. And in all the other pictures I've seen, he's just wearing like that cloth headpiece, or sometimes his head is completely uncovered. So, of course, this is, you know, negative evidence. The lack of something isn't necessarily the proof of something else, but it's worth mentioning there. But from all indications, you know, like if he had become a sole pharaoh, then he would have listed Sobek-Neferu as his successor, and she would have listed him as her predecessor. The fact that it's not done is extremely irregular, and it indicates that he either, you know, a lot of people just think he died, but either died or left on bad terms. So guys, I have some quotes here, which we can do now. I couldn't find any quotes from Amenemhat IV himself, from his own words, but I got the closest thing I was able to get is some testimonies from stelas about some of the people that worked for him. So the most important official that worked under him was Jaff-Horemheb. This is the closest thing I could find to quotes from him. It's not even from him. This is about Jaff-Horemheb, who was his second in command over the Department of Treasury. There's no evidence that he ever had a Department of the Vizier. So his government was not fully formed. But year 6, this comes from one of the stela of Jaff-Horemheb. Year 6, under the majesty of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Makeru-Ra, son of Ra, Amenemhat. That's the full name for Amenemhat IV. Horus of gold, the two goddesses, living forever, beloved of Nemti, made under the direction of the seal bearer of the god, chief interior overseer to the treasury, Jaff-Horemheb, justified, son of Renseneb, justified, possessing honor. So here, why did I read this one? It's just one of the indications that Jaff-Horemheb is the chief of the Department of the Treasury. He's the most important official. And I've got another quote here. This one's a little bigger, guys. This comes from another stela, and I can put pictures of the stela as well. So here, hereditary prince and foremost of action, seal bearer of the god. And by the way, the god they're referring to is the pharaoh, because the pharaoh was like considered to be an avatar of one of the gods, like usually Ra, and in particular the 12th dynasty, they had this propaganda going that Ra could impregnate a woman at any time. So even if it's not like the actual son of the current pharaoh, it's okay because Ra still impregnated this guy's mother, and the evidence that he's the son of Ra is basically that they say so, but also the fact that he's able to hold on to the throne. So it's a big bit of propaganda, but I mean, you guys can see how worship of the state, like literal actual worship of the state, was part of this culture. But I'll continue. So he says, hereditary prince and foremost of action, seal bearer of the god, king's sole friend, in charge of the secrets of the twin goddesses, foster child of the king of the Upper and Lower Egypt. When a child, his praised one, when in charge of the secrets, appointed by him to be blank, promoted blank, it's rubbed out, he who is in charge of the secret of the sanctuary. So this guy, Jaff-Horemheb, is somebody who Amenemhat IV knew as a kid. So it could have been somebody that was educating him in the palace, or somebody that was watching him. Foster child, that would be Amenemhat IV himself, because he's not biologically related to these people. So this is somebody that watched him as a kid, and then when he grew up, he appointed him to the highest possible office that he could. So this is probably a guy that's kind of old, but very trustworthy. And so I'm going to read one more quote here about Jaff-Hormsaf. So year 8, under the majesty of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Makerura, living forever, an offering which the king gives to Ta, Sokar, and Hathor, lady of turquoise, that they may give offerings for the Ka of the chief interior overseer to the treasury, Jaff, blank rubbed out, beloved of his lord, of his affection, filling the heart of the king, filling their hearts, blank of Asia, the interpreter, dragoman, Montuhotep. So now this is talking about a different guy here. Beloved, blank, he who will say, an offering which the king gives, bread and beer, ox flesh and fowl, and every good thing, blank, for the Ka of the physician and magician, blank, an offering which the king gives to Hathor, lady of turquoise, to Sopidu, lord of the foreign lands, for the Ka of the magician. So what this has to do with is a mining expedition. Now, I want to read 2 more quotes just so you guys can, and these are about other staff. So Jaff-Hormsaf is the main guy, okay? But there's some other officials that were a bit lower down. So this is a quote about from the stela of Sa-Sopidu. This is another official in the treasury. So he says, year 4, under the majesty of the king of the Upper and Lower Egypt, Makerura, living forever, an offering which the king gives to Hathor, lady of turquoise, for the Ka of some word I can't say, Sa-Sopidu, justified, possessing honor, truly beloved of his lord, of his affection, firm of sandal, quiet of step, doing that his lord approves, treading the foreign countries for the lord of the 2 lands, sealer of the retinue of the palace approach, Kimau. O you who live and are upon the earth, who shall pass by this stela, if you wish that your gods may praise you and that you may reach Egypt in peace, may you say, thousands of bread, beer, ox flesh, and fowl, cloth and alabaster for the Ka of the sealer, the retinue of the palace approach, Kimau, son of something, Eret, something justified. So these things aren't in the best state of preservation. You guys have any questions about that? Comments?
Not at this time.
Yeah, so it's interesting because on quite a few of the stelas for his officials, you see wording like quiet of step or gentle of step. So I think what that has to do with, again, like we're talking about a culture that's thousands of years ago. But I think what that has to do with is as they're going about their business, they're not causing other problems. Because I know like in English today, like we'll say stuff like tread carefully, which means, don't cause trouble as you go. So,
Exactly.
Yeah. So you think so, great Pharaoh, that that's what they mean by this?
Yeah, I can see the similarity.
Yeah.
You know.
So I'm gonna do one more quote and then we'll move on here. And let's see. I like to do these quotes because it's good to let people speak for themselves as when you get the chance. But of course, like none of these are quotes from Amenemhat the Fourth. They're quotes from his officials. But it's interesting that these guys, they say like, beloved of the king, and I do everything that the one who does everything that the king says. So here's one more that I'm going to read. This comes from the stela of Sa-Hathor. This guy's also part of the Treasury Department. Year 2, under the majesty of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Makerura, living forever, real acquaintance of the king, whom he loves, his favorite, who does all that he praises throughout the course of every day, firm of tread, easy of step, one who sticks to the way of him who advanced him, the seal bearer and assistant to the treasurer, Sa-Hathor, son of Merarit, he went out to survey the Amethyst Desert. According to his majesty's command, he went out to the desert land of Shaul-Bia, the mining region, the seal bearer and captain Min-Chebet being with him. That's where it stops. Guys, why would well, you have any comments about this quote?
No, I don't have any comments at this time. No, I mean, everything seems, to be clear to me. I mean,
All right. So basically, all these quotes, they have to do with mining expeditions. And what you'll notice, like when they talk about the offerings and stuff, of course, you guys know that the Egyptians used to believe that you could take stuff with you into the next life. So,
right, correct.
They also believed that you could, like, say, I want to give this guy, beer, bread, meat, whatever. And if you say it the right way, then he'll get it in the next life. So you can, like, wish them food and other
Like
things.
give them gifts and stuff on their way up to the afterlife.
Yeah, well, they're already in the afterlife, but, like, you're passing by the stela, and if you say it, then you can, they'll get it somehow.
Then they'll find okay, I got it.
Yeah. Right. So, what I want to do now is go over his activities, because there's not a lot of information about his reign. It looks like this guy didn't talk about himself at all. And so what did he do? Most of his activities are gathering resources and trade, including multiple expeditions to Sinai, as well as expeditions to Byblos and Punt. And he also maintains the occupation of Nubia, and he's mentioned in one of the forts. I think more than one, actually, but I know at least one. And they would say, like, the fourth year of, I don't remember which years it was, but there were a few of the water markings where they mark the level of the Nile, and they say year such and such of Amenemhat, because one of the ways they would determine taxes for the next year is based on the level the Nile was. So, Josephus, what he talks about in the Antiquities of the Jews is that Moses waged a war on the Nubians, and he created great slaughter among them and drove them down as far as Meroe. And of course, the 12th dynasty, they invested in building a series of forts in Nubia because the Nubians were like a constant threat for them. And his name is mentioned in some of these forts. So it looks like Amenemhat IV was in charge of mainly the peripheral territories. He wasn't doing much in the homeland of Egypt proper. And of course, if this is Moses, and he's an Israelite and they know it, obviously they're going to try to keep him away from seeing what's going on with his people, right? They're going to keep him out of the forced labor. And that could be why there's no vizier, because then he would be seeing that stuff and he'd be involved in it. So his name, it does appear in the Temple of Medinet Madi, which is used where I guess it's just the base that exists now. But it was used, the base of a statue that was used to contain a fixture. It had a fixture of statues of Amenemhat III and IV standing on either side of Sobek. And this is the only time that Amenemhat IV is ever associated with Sobek. And one of the things that they talk about in this book that I read, Amenemhat IV and the end of the 12th dynasty, the author, she notices that this guy has only one association with Sobek, and other than that, doesn't want anything to do with it. So, guys, did you ever think about why the river? Like, why did they throw the baby? Why would they throw the babies in the river? Obviously, it's to kill them, but why the river? That's gross.
That seems very I mean, gruesome. Just inhumane.
Well, not just that, but it's also dirty and gross because that's where your farm water comes from for irrigation and stuff.
Yeah.
So, who's the main god of the Nile River? It is Sobek. And, Sobek is also like represented by the alligators in the river. So, Amenemhat III, he was a big lover of Sobek. And it was the reason he threw the babies into the water is because, it's doing two things at once. One is it is reducing the population of these people he doesn't want, but also it's an offering to Sobek. Like he's feeding Sobek because the alligators in the river are his agents. So it's an act of it's population control, but it's also an act of devotion, like he's serving his god. And the author, she doesn't know why Amenemhat IV doesn't want to be related to Sobek, like why he's breaking from that cult. Of course, if he's an Israelite, and we know that he's not biologically related to them, he doesn't want to be doesn't want anything to do with Sobek because that's like how his people were killed. Kind of like today, you won't have a Jewish person that wants to go around wearing a swastika or like thinking Hitler's a good guy. Same kind of thing. Like that's a symbol of death and oppression for them. Similarly, Sobek would have been a symbol of death and oppression to them, back then, at least following this incident. So yeah, that's the only time where he's ever connected to Sobek, and of course that temple was Amenemhat III. It was mainly his doing, so he probably couldn't help that. But now he does do some building, and what he does is he completes the temple of Hathor at Serebet el Kadim, that's in Sinai, the Sinai Peninsula. So the temple was begun during the reign of Senusret I, supposedly. They're not completely sure. And it was used by the miners who were operating in Sinai. So there were other expeditions to Sinai to get building materials and like precious materials as well for making jewelry. And these guys would worship their gods while they were out there. So Senusret I, he just kind of allowed them to create like an outdoor space of worship, which was not covered. And that was the beginning of this complex. Then Amenemhat IV, out of all the kings in the 12th dynasty, he is the most active in this region of Sinai, and the most involved in the building of Serebet el-Kadim site. And it came to serve as like the headquarters for the mining operations in Sinai. Okay, so here I'm going to read another quote from Amenemhat IV and the end of the 12th dynasty and Great Pharaoh. While I'm doing this, I want you to look up Exodus chapter 24 and be ready.
Sure, absolutely. I do have it up. Okay.
Here's what she says regarding this site in Sinai. In Serebet el-Kadim, the shrine dedicated to the goddess Hathor deserves special attention, together with the temple of Medinet Mahdi. It is one of the few examples of surviving Middle Kingdom architecture. It was built on the northern side of the rocky plateau along an east-west axis. Its current structure is the result of different construction operations, the most important of which dates back to the 12th dynasty. The sanctuary must have been founded during Senusret I's reign. However, his work there merely defined a rectangular sacred space. Several following rulers gave their contributions to the complex, which was organized along two parallel axes, each one leading to two separate places of worship. This structure, which was kept unchanged in its main aspects, was enlarged and completed by a series of decorations during the reigns of Amenemhat III and Amenemhat IV. The monumentalization of Hathor's chapel on the eastern side of the sanctuary, which dates to the beginning of Amenemhat III's reign, led to the construction of an outdoor area used to celebrate rituals. During the years, this area was developed into a court of feasts, surrounded by many commemorative stelae from various expeditions. During Amenemhat IV's reign, the court was then equipped with a roof supported by columns, and was thus turned into a colonnaded courtyard. This sovereign's works are recorded by some fragments of the wall decoration, where the king is remembered by his Horus name Keperu. Fragment B21 bears a date which unfortunately does not include a regnal year, so it is not possible to give a precise chronology of the work, or to understand whether Amenemhat III was still alive at the time of these alterations. So of course, I believe he was still alive. But so basically, what he does is he puts a roof over it, so the workers can have their shade, and it's built on the side of a mountain, right? And the roof is supported by columns, and there's a colonnaded courtyard. So that's the main thing I want you guys to know. So now, Great Pharaoh, having read this, I would like you to read Exodus chapter 24, verses 4 through 5.
Absolutely. Verses 24 through 25. Okay.
No, chapter 24, verses 4 through 5.
4 through 5. Okay, correct.
Huh?
And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, and he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young men of the children of Israel, who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord.
So, when I read this in the book I was reading by the Amenemhat IV about him, that was what I thought about next, because he has, a lot of people, you think about Moses and what he built for the Israelites, most people think about the tabernacle, but they forget about this structure that he made. Like, he made a permanent place of worship on the side of a mountain, and they offered sacrifices there. And I never heard anybody mention this in any church sermon ever at once, but it looks like he had some experience doing this kind of thing already, and that's how he had the knowledge to do this again. So you see what I'm talking about, right? So he'd already built something like this before for the Egyptians. Now he's building one for the Israelites.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's also a shrine of kings nearby in this location in Serabet El Kadim that has 4 columns. So I believe that this is where Moses began to get his feet. I shouldn't say I was going to say get his feet wet, but talking about a desert. So this is where he began to get his experience with architecture, which was, of course, important for the Israelites because they had nothing. I mean, they were menial laborers, and he's going to build their civilization. Did like so much to build their civilization, and also give them the laws of God and everything. But so this Shrine of Kings was actually begun by Amenemhat III, which is near the Temple of Hathor. Most likely finished by Amenemhat IV, and it contains images of gods legitimating the rule of Amenemhat IV. And legitimation is a recurring theme all throughout the rule of Amenemhat IV, and that's one of the things that this author, she noticed, is that they really worked hard to try and convince everybody that this guy is a legitimate ruler throughout their artwork and dedications. And she said that it hasn't been the same amount of effort hasn't been put in since the beginning of the 12th dynasty. When the 12th dynasty first came to power, they had to really work hard to legitimize themselves. And again, they've gone back to kind of that intensity with Amenemhat IV. There's also in this the Shrine of Kings, there were some images of people put in who are supposedly family members of Amenemhat IV, like additional family members, but we don't know who exactly they are because the names are not preserved, like they're scratched off or rubbed out. And yeah, like the legitimation goes on throughout his whole reign, attempts at legitimation. And some of the ways they do it is they connect him to Amenemhat I. So Amenemhat the First, like I told Stilgar in the previous video, is that Amenemhat the First actually wasn't an Egyptian either. He was only half. His father was an Egyptian. His mother was actually a Nubian. And obviously, you know, one problem he had was that he wasn't of royal blood. The second problem he had is he wasn't even a real Egyptian. He's only half. So he's got kind of a hill, you know, a steep hill to go up in order to appear legitimate, Amenemhat the First. So sometimes his name would be written as Amini, and it's like the short form of it. And so they did the same thing with Amenemhat the Fourth. Sometimes they wrote his name as Amini in order to kind of refer him back to this guy. And you know, the whole thing is like, well, okay, the first Amenemhat wasn't, you know, a true Egyptian, but he did a good job. So this guy, even though he's not a true Egyptian, he can also do a good job. And by everything I've seen, it looks like he did do a good job until he lost his cool, basically. But there's also attempts made to link him to Sneferu, which was one of the great pharaohs of the Old Kingdom, I think the Fourth Dynasty, and he built like, I think 2 pyramids, something like that. He was a great builder. And the pharaohs of the 12th Dynasty, they really liked Sneferu. They thought he was like a heroic guy, and they saw themselves as the continuation of Sneferu. And you know, they in their literature they wrote stuff indicating that the period between the Fourth Dynasty and the 12th Dynasty is like a barbarous time of chaos, which should not have been. But these guys are here to fix it, and so they're the justified successors of Sneferu, basically. Now, there's also some verbiage or appeals, I guess you could say, to kind of link Amenemhat IV with a tomb. So there's not, he's avoiding Sobek, but he's okay, or seemingly okay, with being linked to a tomb. So I'm sure like somebody is going to be saying like, okay, if this is Moses, why is he okay with all this paganism? And why would he be okay with being linked to a moon and a tomb? So first thing I want to do is read out his full name, and then I'll explain what's up with the paganism. So the full name,
Right.
for him, yeah, you were thinking that, weren't you, Great Pharaoh?
Yeah.
I know it. I know you.
To some
You're
extent, yeah,
like
sure.
doubting me because of this, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna prove it though. You know, I don't say anything unless I'm pretty sure.
Oh, I know that.
Yeah, man. I'll give you the proof. So, his full name that he has on the throne, it was there's 3 parts that the pharaohs would have to their name, and this is consistent throughout the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom period, this formula for naming. So the first part is called the Horus name. The middle is called the throne name, and then the last part is like the given name. So there's different symbols that precede the name. So Horus, Khepri Khepru, then the dual king, which is the symbol that precedes the throne name. So his throne name is Makerura, and then given name is Amenemhat. So Khepri Khepru, Makerura, Amenemhat, and from the quotes that I read to you guys, you can see in those quotes they just would call him Makerura sometimes. But what it means is, so let's talk about the meaning of his name. Okay, so Khepri Khepru, it means everlasting manifestations. His middle name or throne name, Makerura, it means the righteous one of Ra. And again, we're talking about Ra being used to legitimate the pharaoh, even someone who's not biologically supposed to be there. And then his last name or his given name is Amenemhat. And what that means is a moon is in front. So, you know, Great Pharaoh and Stilgar, you know, we are Christians living in the 21st century after all this is over. So we aren't going to want to name our kids after pagan gods, and we probably wouldn't want to have like one of these names put onto us.
Sure.
But what I want you guys to do is, first of all, remember this is before the law of Moses was given, because he's still in Egypt. So he doesn't have like much of a holy text to refer to, although I think it would have had like some documents for Genesis. But I want you guys to do something. Stilgar, I want you to look up a moon. And Great Pharaoh, I want you to look up a tomb on the internet. Any source is fine.
A tomb. Okay.
Yeah, you look up a tomb. Stilgar, you look up a moon. And whichever one of you guys gets there first.
Tomb.
ATUM.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have a moon, a deity.
Go ahead and read some of it.
He was a major ancient Egyptian deity who appears as a member of the Hermopolitan Akhdod. The moon was attested from the Old Kingdom together with his wife Amunet. His oracle in Siwa Oasis, located in western Egypt near the Libyan desert, remained the only oracle of Amun throughout.
Okay, what is a moon? How did a moon come to be, according to your site that you've got there? And what domain is he in charge of? What did he do, and how did he come to be? See if you can find that.
I mean, it says he was considered to be the first god, having created himself sitting on a mound.
That's a tomb.
And rose the primordial waters.
That's a tomb. All right, so you see, he created himself, right? He wasn't
I understand
created.
that that's not what he did, but that's just sort of an intro.
Right. Yeah. So a tomb is a self-existing god, and you notice there's a connection with waters. You know, like in Genesis, it talks about when God created this world, it was void and without form, and the Spirit of God moved across the waters. So there's a couple things I'm trying to get at. One is Amun is the oldest of the Egyptian gods. Okay, the one that I had Stilgar look up, and usually if you go like the first couple things that will come up, he is believed to have been the self-existing, eternal, has no beginning, and that they also call him the great honker because he made a honk like a goose, and then the world came into existence. And then a tomb, of course, it says he created himself, and you know, it looks like it. So both of them, they kind of resemble a little bit what the Bible tells us about, you know, God being eternal and having created the world, and, you know, the Spirit of God moving across the waters. So for somebody who just has mainly like oral traditions, and then get taken and raised in the palace and you hear this kind of stuff, it could be confusing. But in the absence of a written text, you might think that these are other names for the same God. You guys following me?
Yes.
All right. So Stilgar, I want you
Yeah.
actually, Stilgar, I want you to get Exodus 23. Look up Exodus 23. Great Pharaoh, I want you to get to Exodus 3.
Exodus 3, sure.
Yeah, Exodus 3. And Stilgar, you get Exodus chapter 23.
Not a problem here. Okay, I have mine ready. I have mine up.
All right, so go ahead, and Great Pharaoh, I want you to read, bearing in mind everything I just said, I want you to read Exodus 3, verses 12 through 13.
Sure. Here we go. So he said, I will certainly be with you, and this shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Then Moses said to God, indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus, you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you.
So he doesn't know what name that God should be called by. You see it? This is his first encounter with God. He doesn't know. He's saying, oh, what should I tell them? And what is I am that I am means I am the one who exists of myself, right?
Yes.
So now you can understand a little bit why he was willing to kind of tolerate this stuff. And now you see what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, but
Still,
I am also implies that God did not, there's no beginning or end. That's what makes God unique. So when you
yes,
say I am, it's a present tense. It's not talking about a past or future.
right. Yeah, he exists
That's what makes
eternally.
God unique. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So the Egyptians, they had divided this, like a moon was like their god that they probably it's a garbled up memory of the true God where but I mean we shouldn't say the name Amun, right? But you can see, Moses, he doesn't know what name he's supposed to use. Now, Stilgar, read Exodus 23, verse 13.
And in all things that I have said unto you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of other gods, neither let it be heard out of thy mouth.
So it's not until like a good deal later that God says, don't use these other names. The law is given later on, basically. Now, the last thing I want to do here, and then I'm just going to, last bit of evidence that I want to go over, is I want to read the conclusion that this author came to of Amenemhat in the end of the 12th dynasty. So I'm going to read her last words here at the end of the book, what her conclusion was, bearing in mind, guys, that she's not a Christian, but she still came to this conclusion. So now here's what she concludes about Amenemhat IV after analyzing all his documents. She says, there are clear clues suggesting Amenemhat IV's intention to distance himself from his predecessor's reign. In the comparisons drawn between Medinet Mahdi and Serabit el-Qadim, interesting convergences have been highlighted in multiple elements in each place. However, it is important to point out that in addition to the ideological function and the intention to continue the celebration of the monarchy cult, the decision to establish such a parallel could go in the direction of changing, above all, the previous symbolic sites. It is possible that it was not so important which deities would have replaced those of the Fayum. The crucial thing was to turn away from the region itself and its cults. In this way, it seems that the new king, Amenemhat IV, with his works in Sinai, wanted to create a representative and celebratory place for his own kingdom, as his predecessor had done with the Fayum region. At the same time, he wanted to break away from the latter, both in its material and its theological aspects. In conclusion, an institutional continuity between Amenemhat III and Amenemhat IV's reigns does not seem to correspond to a similar continuity in cults and traditions. That is, in short, a cultural continuity. In contrast to what would happen with Sobek-Nefru, with the exception of the Temple of Medinet Mahdi, which still belongs to a transitional phase preceding the final acquisition of power by the new king. There appears to be a strong desire shown by Amenemhat IV to cut ties with Amenemhat III's family and all the natural consequences. So, reading that, I'm just kind of like, well, that's what we would expect to find, right? And of course, Sobek-Nefru, when she takes over, immediately she gets back to patronizing Sobek. And of course, she doesn't connect herself at all to Amenemhat IV. But interestingly,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
she doesn't destroy his monument and his statues. It's like she doesn't destroy it either, but she doesn't list him as her predecessor. So he kind of takes things off the rails from the way that Amenemhat III was going, and then Sobek-Nefru puts it back. Of course, the Pharaoh that wanted to kill Moses is going to be Amenemhat III. It's not going to be Sobek-Nefru, because the Bible says that it's a guy that he's running away from very
Right.
clearly.
That's
And
right.
it was the same guy that tossed the babies. I mean, this has to be the guy, because
Mm-hmm.
he meets like all the hallmarks, and he has a reign that's long enough. And I believe his reign is actually the longest out of the whole 12th dynasty.
That's
So
right. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So what I want
That's
to do
right.
is just sum it up a little bit, And then if you guys are okay with it, I would like to debunk some of the other ideas about who Moses is. So if I can just recap it all. So here, in my view, from my research, here's basically what happened. So Israelite slavery starts in the 12th dynasty, maybe near the beginning, depending on the exact amount of time in slavery. It's possible it starts with Amenemhat the first or his son Senusret the first. So at any rate, it starts in the 12th dynasty. That's the only place it can be because it's the only time when pyramids are being built with bricks. Then Amenemhat III is the pharaoh who orders the Israelite babies to be thrown into the river. And of course, why the river? Because he worships Sobek, that's his favorite god. And Sobek is also the god that is supposed to protect the pharaoh from dark magic, right? Including foreign gods. Sobek Nefru is at the river, probably praying to Sobek. I mean, we know she was in the water because the Bible says she's bathing. But, she's praying to Sobek maybe. And when Moses comes along in the basket, well, I guess this is from Sobek because he's the master of the river. Then when Moses grows up, the Nubians attack. And his first test of power, they kind of, at this point, maybe they're not sure they want him to rule, but they decide to give him a try because they're so desperate. So he repels the Nubians all the way back down as far as Meroe. But even after he's successful at this, they still don't trust him. And of course, Josephus, he doesn't mention that Moses murders the Egyptian guard. He says that the reason he left is because the Egyptians were terrified of him and they persuaded the Pharaoh to kill him. So, of course, both can be true at the same time. Because you think about it, why does it matter if he kills a low-level like overseer guy? Pharaoh can kill anybody he wants to. I mean, it's true, right? Like Joseph Stalin could kill anybody. Think of any like dictator type society.
Sure.
King can just kill somebody in the street and nobody can do anything about it. Now, it could lead to bad things. Like it could lead to delegitimization. But I mean, so why would they make a big deal of Moses killing this guy? Now, we talked about how they had pushed this belief that the god Ra can incarnate the womb of any woman, including a foreigner. However, it's possible, I don't believe that the ruling class really believed this stuff, but it was mainly for the regular people. And the regular people, they could have thought like maybe a foreign god was incarnating. And that would be terrifying for them because they're polytheists. So, at any rate, they still don't trust him for whatever reason, for good reasons, I guess. They don't trust him completely. And they assign, even though he's appointed the co-regency, he doesn't have a full government. So he doesn't have a bureau of the vizier because then he'd be overseeing the forced labor, which is Israelites, being forced to do stuff. So they assign him to the treasury and to watching over the peripheral territories, like maintaining the peace in Nubia and Sinai. And that's what he does. And he does a whole lot of mining expeditions in Sinai. Now, some of the atheists that believe that Amenemhat IV did rule by himself for a while, one of the reasons they give for it is because Amenemhat III had previously been doing resource gathering expeditions to Sinai. And what they say is that, well, if you fit Amenemhat IV's reign completely inside of Amenemhat III's, then there would be redundant expeditions by both pharaohs going on in Sinai at the same time. But think about it, guys. If you're Moses and most of your people are enslaved and getting hit with whips and all that stuff, and you're also the co-regent or the junior pharaoh, what are you? You're gonna want to free your people, right? So
absolutely right.
Maybe the first thing you do is, we talked about. Well, you weren't here for this one, Great Pharaoh, but you were here, Stilgar. Remember, we talked about the Brooklyn Papyrus, where they give a slave list and it has these Hebrew names on it, and it's a woman who's a private owner. Her name is Senebtisi. She has like 90 slaves, and like half of them have Middle Eastern Semitic names, and then some of them have specifically biblical Hebrew names. So if you're wanting to free your people, and at least some of them are privately owned, you gotta do something, like maybe buy them out, right? Like you're gonna free them, you got to compensate the slave owner. Even though you're the pharaoh and you could just say too bad for you, you can only say too bad for you to so many people before somebody puts a knife in your back.
Right.
So
Correct.
Probably they only, to test him out, like his first thing is dealing with the imminent threat. And then, okay, you did that well. Let's give you some more responsibilities. We'll start him off with the treasury, and we'll keep him away from the homeland because, you know, maybe he won't be able to handle it. So yeah, eventually he either does get assigned. So what I think he's doing is trying to gather extra resources so he can free his people legally, and then you know, without bloodshed. And then eventually he does get assigned interior duties, or he is looking at the interior to see what's going on. So one of you guys, I want you to read Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 through 14. So who wants to do that?
I'll go ahead and read that, okay? 11 through 14, here we go. Now it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that way, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And when he went out the second day, behold, two Hebrew men were fighting. And he said to the one who did the wrong, Why are you striking your companion? Then he said, Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? So Moses feared and said, Surely this thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well.
Yeah, so the guy says, who made you judge and ruler over us, right?
Yes.
So, like I mentioned earlier before, the department of the vizier is the aspect of the government that oversees the forced labor. And Moses, he didn't have that. There's no documentary evidence. All this guy had was the department of the treasury. So his government was half formed. So the guy knows, like, they knew who he was because there were statues of him with his face and, you know, illustrations, drawings as well. Well, the drawings, you can't really see the face that well, but there are statues with his face. One of them's still around. One of them, the face is still intact. I'll put it in the slideshow. And there were also sphinxes. So they knew who he was, right? But he wasn't, he actually wasn't in charge of them based on my research. He only had the treasury department. So that's why the guy is, so if you think of it like this, the guy is saying, well, why, since when are you in charge of us? Who put you in charge? You know, what are you going to do? Kill me?
Right.
So basically he really wasn't in charge of them yet. Or this might have been like, because we know for at least 2 days he came out to observe the workers. So probably he was looking at what he was about to get assigned, and he just couldn't take it, seeing the torture, you know. And you know, the Jews, they have a rule. They used to whip people as punishment themselves, but and the Romans as well. But the rule was like, okay, the most amount of lashes you can give somebody is 40 lashes, but then you can't actually give 40. You have to count. You can only count to 39. So officially you're sentenced to 40, but it's always -1. Okay. And the reason is because if, like, they determined that if you get more than 40 lashes, it could kill you. So whatever this guy was doing, it was probably pretty crazy, and you know and he just couldn't take it. Like, there's actually a picture which I may include in the slideshow if I can find it, of an African American slave taken in the 1800s, and this guy was like whipped a lot, and his back is looking really messed up. So the Israelites, you know, they were in that same kind of situation. So I'll put this picture if I can find it, just so you guys can get an idea kind of like what Moses saw. But yeah, let's see. Okay, so yeah, hopefully that makes sense. But
Oh yeah.
now
Oh, yeah.
what did you guys ever think about why he ran to Midian?
I mean, he didn't want to get killed. Pharaoh was trying to avenge him for taking out one of his guys.
Yeah, but there were other places he could have gone. He could have gone to Nubia. He could have gone to Libya, but he went to Midian. And it turns out that, like Josephus, what he says is he snuck out by back roads and came out of the country that way. So there's a story that was written at the beginning of the 12th dynasty called the Tale of Senuhi. And it's about a guy who's a courtier that runs away after Amenemhat I is murdered. He's afraid he's going to get killed in the regime change. So in the story, Senuhi, he runs all the way, he sneaks out of the country and keeps running until he gets somewhere in Canaan, which the Egyptians used to call Retjinu. And he doesn't take proper supplies with him, and he almost passes out and dies before he can get to water. And the Canaanites, they come and they pick him up, and there's a guy named Eminenshi who takes him in, and he feeds him and gives him water. And then he says, you might want to stay with me because there's other Egyptians living with us, so you can hear your own language and talk to them. And also he offers him his daughter and makes him the overseer of property. So it's kind of like what happens when Moses gets to Midian and the guy offers him his daughter Zipporah and then has him oversee the flocks. So Midian, in case you guys don't know, is actually in Saudi Arabia. It's been found. And it looks like these people, they used to live underground, or at least underground houses have been found.
Okay.
And it seems like Moses was following the same pattern that's in Senuhi. Now, some people have said, like, oh, the story of Moses is just a ripoff of Senuhi because of the similarities. But it seems more like Moses learned from Senuhi, because Senuhi he passed out and he almost died. Moses stopped at a well, so he learned from that story, like, hey, I better stop at a well. And then, he helped those women when they showed up. So he knew what he was doing. He was learning. He probably had Senuhi on his mind, but also the story of Jacob when, Jacob meets Rachel. What does he do to impress her? He takes the stone off of the well. He had superior strength. So his actions, he was coming from his cultural background. Both cultures. He's kind of a guy with a foot in two different worlds, one foot in each. So that he knew what to do. He had these examples from history coming before. And also, I believe that he kept his identifying documents from when he was on the throne. And by the way, some of the scarab seals from Amenemhat IV are still intact, or at least one is, and there'll be a picture of it somewhere in this. But of course, when he goes back to Egypt, they would have still known who he was, because there's statues, of his face. Like the Egyptian statues, I mean, you've seen them, Great Pharaoh. The bodies aren't very realistic, but usually the faces are, right?
Right.
So they could recognize him. All he has to do is shave off his beard, and he was, he lived for 120 years. So for him, at 80 years old, it was probably like the equivalent of what would be like 50 for us. And they would have still recognized him. And I mean, and also, like, thinking about how does he get into the court of Pharaoh? He gets in because of his documents, most likely. The Bible doesn't say that, but it's actually, you really just couldn't just walk into the court of Pharaoh. Like, there's another story I read from this book that I have. It's called The Tale of Senuhi and Other Ancient Egyptian Poems. And it is from, it's a compilation of 12th dynasty literature. And it includes the Ipuwer Papyrus and the teachings of the wisdom of Amenemhat. And one of the stories in here is called The Tale of the Eloquent Peasant. And in this story, there's a peasant, not a slave, but just like a lower class guy who's like a subsistence farmer or something.
Okay.
And he gets his donkeys stolen
Okay.
by a noble. And then when he gets to Egypt, he tries to file a formal complaint, and he can't get anywhere near the pharaoh. And so he appeals to like some lesser official, and he appeals to him for days. And at one point, he comes to this guy at an irregular time, like when he's coming out of his office, I guess, going home for the day. And the official has him whipped for appearing at this time. So there's no way that somebody without any kind of status is going to be able to go straight and talk to the pharaoh. So Moses, he needs to be a high-ranking guy that they would recognize and just be able to pass through all of the bureaucracy. So I don't know. I think I give us like a 85% probability that this is the guy. Amenemhat IV is Moses. Not completely 100% sure, but this is the best this is supported by the most evidence out of everything I've seen. And Amenemhat III perfectly fits, with what Josephus said and, what's in the Bible. I mean, he was building those irrigation projects and pyramids, like 2 for himself. And then he started pyramids for his daughters. I don't believe they were ever, I'm not sure if they were ever finished, but I mean, it fits like a glove. You guys can go ahead and give your final thoughts, and then we'll close it off. And I'll mention we'll go over why the other theories don't work.
Yeah, well, I think that the back in the day, obviously they were worshiping many pagan gods and things like that. So God began to reveal himself to the people of the Egyptians through Moses from a very long time ago. So just as they used violence, that violence reflected kind of with God. God was tired of the abuse. God was tired of the slavery, and he used his violence in a way to stop that. So that's how you can start it off in that way, and that's how God started his work there. So I think it's very interesting that you brought up the topic of Moses, and we see it once again, biblically and historically. There are so many connections. It's quite remarkable, and we're so glad to see that.
Yeah,
we're so glad to see that. Yes,
and the plagues of Egypt. Each one was actually an insult to a different Egyptian god. Mm-hmm. So just by turning the Nile to blood, what God is showing is like Sobek is supposed to be in charge of the Nile, right? It's his creation. Well, God is showing them that either Sobek doesn't exist at all, or he is irrelevant. Like God is more powerful because he can turn the river to blood and nobody could do anything about it. And I don't remember I know that the plague of darkness was like a judgment on Ra, the sun god. And it even says that in the Bible, like it says, that he's judging the Egyptian gods, something like that. I used to know what each plague is like a different kind of insult, basically. Maybe at some other point in time we can do a study on that if people are interested. But yeah, I mean, it is true. Like, man, if I was living back then and I was a worshiper of Sobek, like, of course, Sobek Nefru and Amenemhat III are already dead before Moses comes back. But, the Sobek Nefru brought the cult back and it continued for a while. I would have been like, man, what's the point of even praying to Sobek? He can't do anything. Can't even stop his creation from being manhandled by another god.
Right.
Like, that must have been terrifying for them, And it says in the Bible that it wasn't just Israelites that left. A lot of other people left with them. People that were convinced, that this was the true God. Then there were a lot of other people that were just like, I think most people that were just like, okay, get out, just get out. They gave them all their jewelry and stuff. Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. All right, guys. If there's nothing else, then I'll go ahead and close it off. And I will see you guys in the next one.
Awesome. Thank you.
Deus homo factus est natura mirante, mundus renovatus est a Christo regnante. gaudete, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine gaudete.